backgrounds and sexual orientations, gender identities and abilities. We belong to the Unitarian Universalist Association of Congregations, and we are guided and inspired by its values and principles. Those values and principles move us to remember that we in Northampton inhabit unceded land of the Pecumtuck and Nipmuc peoples. Our values and principles remind us to acknowledge our responsibility to face all the painful legacies of dispossession and systemic racism that are part of our collective history, even as we affirm and celebrate the legacies that inspire us. We are here to support and celebrate one another and to renew ourselves with hope and gratitude and new resolve. This morning, our service is on Zoom and YouTube, and we have many people in the Great Hall. It's really wonderful to see you all. We are on new ground, doing services both live and via internet. We very much appreciate everyone's patience and goodwill. If you are new or returning after a time away, welcome. We're very glad you're here. Please feel free to fill out a welcome card, which you can put in the offering plate right over there after the service. Doing that allows us to put you on our email contact list. For those of you online, there is a link to the card in the chat. Those of you here in person, thank you for wearing your masks. Please also check to make sure that you and everyone in your group are sitting 6 feet away from the next person or group. We also suggest that because it's hard to maintain distance while chatting with people, that you move outside to greet each other after the service. We ask everyone online to please remain muted throughout the service and turn off your videos except during the greeting in order to help the technology work as smoothly as possible. We hope you'll stay for or join the Zoom social hour afterwards. It is a great way to engage in meaningful conversations with people you might not have met otherwise. And now we'll begin our service.
We bid you welcome, who come with weary spirit seeking rest, who come with troubles that are too much with you, who come hurt and afraid. We bid you welcome, who come with hope in your hearts. We bid you welcome, who know this gathering, this meeting together as a homecoming. We bid you welcome, who are seekers of a new community or a new faith. Whoever you are, wherever you are on your journey, we bid you welcome.
I invite you to rise for our chalice lighting. We are still asking those of you in the Great Hall to refrain from singing, but I hope you will hum gently or sing in your minds. And those of you online, please sing aloud for everyone here. We light our chalice as a beacon of faith, a sign of our quest for truth and meaning. We light our chalice as a beacon of hope, in celebration of the life we share together.
Jessica is getting a little break this morning, so I get to read the story. It's called The Sandwich Swap, and it's written by Queen Reina Al Abdullah of Jordan, who was born in Kuwait. She's a Palestinian who was born in Kuwait, and it's based on something that happened to her in her childhood. And Molly, I'm going to ask you to move the slide. So the first picture is one of a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Oops. There it is, next one. It began with a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Next slide. And it ended with a hummus sandwich. Next slide. Salma and Lily were best friends at school. Next picture. They drew pictures together. Next picture. They played on the swings together. Next picture. They jumped rope together. And they ate their lunches together. But just what they ate was a little different. Lily ate a peanut butter and jelly sandwich every day for lunch. Salma ate a hummus and pita sandwich every day for lunch. And although Lily never said it out loud, she thought Salma's sandwich looked weird and yucky. She felt terrible that her friend had to eat that icky chickpea paste every day. Ew, yuck. And although Salma never said it out loud, she thought Lily's sandwich looked strange and gross. She felt awful that her friend had to eat that gooey peanut paste every day. Yuck, gross. One day, Lily couldn't hold back those pesky thoughts. Your sandwich looks yucky, she blurted out. What did you say? Salma asked, thinking she must have misunderstood her friend. I said, your sandwich looks yucky. Salma frowned. She looked at the thin, soft bread. She thought of her beautiful, smiling mother as she carefully cut Salma's sandwich into two neat halves that morning. Her hurt feelings turned into mad feelings. Yeah, well, your sandwich looks gross and it smells bad too, Salma snapped back. Lily looked surprised. She sniffed the thick, squishy bread and she thought of her dad in his silly apron, whistling as he cut the sandwich into 2 perfect triangles that morning. Lily scowled. It does not smell bad. Oh, does too. You, yuck, you, gross. Next page, Molly. Uh-oh. I think we missed a page. That afternoon, the friends did not draw pictures together. They didn't swing, they didn't jump rope, and the next day, nope, go back one. The next day, Salma ate her lunch at one table and Lily ate her lunch at the other. Meanwhile, the peanut butter versus hummus story had spread and everyone began choosing sides. Each side had something not very nice to say to the others. Peanut butter breath, jelly heads, garlic breath, chickpea brain. Pretty soon, rude insults that had nothing at all to do with peanut butter or hummus. You're weird, you're stupid, you look funny, you dress dumb. And then it happened. Somebody yelled, now, Molly. Food fight! Peanut butter and hummus sandwiches and other lunch favorites began. This would never happen at anyone's school here, right? Right? No, good. And other lunch favorites began flying back and forth between both sides of the lunchroom. They stuck to the walls, they stuck to the ceiling, they stuck to the lunch lady. When the sandwiches were all gone, pudding cups and applesauce, what a mess, and carrots took flight. Salma and Lily looked at one another from across the rowdy, spattered room. They both felt ashamed by what they saw. They both felt really ashamed. When the principal called them into her office after they had helped clean up the mess. The following day, Salma set her lunch down across from Lily's. The 2 girls nibbled on their sandwiches in silence, and finally, Lily got up the courage to speak. Would you like to try a bite of my peanut butter and jelly? Salma grinned. Sure, why not? Would you like to try my hummus and pita? Lily laughed. I like that. On the count of 3? Okay, on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3, and that's how it all began, with a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and ended with a hummus and pita sandwich. This is delicious. This is heavenly. The girls giggled and hugged. Next one. And there they are, friends again. So what hymn goes after a story about a food fight? Let's sing together or hum together number 16, Simple Gifts.
And now it's time for us to greet one another. If you're in the Great Hall, please turn and wave to one another. If you're on Zoom, you are invited to turn on your videos, and if you'd like, please say hello in the chat. If you're new, we'd love to welcome you.
You don't have to. No one's talking this morning. Say hello out there. Who's that? All right, you can read those, Val.
Val says, good morning. Susan says, need group choice. Naomi Clayman says, hello, good people. Janet Spongberg, we may not have the gallery option. Option?
Huh.
Hi, everyone.
I think you should. All right. That's probably good enough then.
All right. Thank you all. It has been wonderful to see you. And now it's time for everyone participating in religious education activities to leave us, and we will sing you out.
Go now in peace, go now in peace. May the spirit of love surround you everywhere, everywhere you may go. Go now in peace, go now in peace. May the spirit of love surround you everywhere, everywhere you may go. You may go.
Okay. Mimi Madison said, what song goes after a food fight? One that we hummus together. Wasn't my idea. Someone's paying attention. We have a reading this morning from the first book of the Hebrew Bible, the book of Genesis, Genesis 4. This is the story of Cain and Abel. Now the man, that's Adam, knew his wife Eve, and she conceived and bore Cain, saying, I have produced a man with the help of the Lord. Next, she bore his brother Abel. Now Abel was a keeper of sheep, and Cain a tiller of the ground. And in the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground, and Abel, for his part, brought of the firstlings of his flock, their fat portions. And the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering, but for Cain and his he had no regard. So Cain was very angry. The Lord said to Cain, why are you angry? Why is your countenance fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is lurking at the door, its desire is for you, but you must master it. And then Cain said to his brother Abel, let us go out to the field. And when they were in the field, Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. Then the Lord said to Cain, where is your brother Abel? And he said, I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper?
Our generosity makes everything we do possible, and it helps us support organizations and movements in the greater community. Half of the proceeds of each week's offering support the Society's operating budget, and half are shared outside our walls. Organizations we're supporting between now and the end of the calendar year are Catholic Charities of Greater Springfield's Afghan refugee support and resettlement work, the First Nations COVID-19 Emergency Response Fund, the Movement Voter Project, Embrace Race, Springfield's Arise for Social Justice. You can mail in a check or donate online. The link is in the chat. You may also put cash or check in the offering plate here on the chancel after the service. Thank you. Elise Jackendorf is our guest pianist this morning. She has played in many congregations throughout the valley, including here in Northampton many years ago. We're happy to welcome her this morning. And now we'll listen to our offertory music.
Our meditation comes from Mother Teresa. It is easy to love those who live far away. It is not always easy to love those who live right next to us. It is easier to offer a dish of rice to meet the hunger of a needy person than to comfort the loneliness and anguish of someone in our own home who does not feel loved. I want you to go and find the poor in your homes. Above all, your love has to start there. I want you to be the good news to those around you. Let's take a moment together in silence.
Building bridges between our divisions. I reach out to you, will you reach out to me? With all our voices and all of our visions, strength we would make such sweet harmony.
Zheng Zhao was an influential Chinese philosopher who lived around the 4th century before the Common Era. He is credited with writing in whole or in part one of the foundational texts of Taoism. And this is a little excerpt from that. Granting that you and I argue, if you get the better of me, and not I of you, are you necessarily right and I wrong? Or if I get the better of you and not you of me, am I necessarily right and you wrong? Are we both partly right and partly wrong? You and I cannot know this, and therefore we all live in darkness. Let's sing or hum together and rise in body or spirit for hymn number 129, Let Love Continue Long.
Let love continue long and show to us the way. And if that love be strong, no word can have a say. And if that love remain not strong, no word can ever have a say. If love cannot be found, no common faith prevails, and love does not abound, no common faith will fail. When love does not abound, a common faith will always fail. If we in love unite, debate can cause no strife. With this love in sight, disputes enrich our life. For with this bond of human love, disputes can keep a richer life. May love continue long and lead us on our way. For if that love be strong, no word can have a
With love, say the hymn writers, debates cause no strife and disputes enrich our life. We read about a dispute from the book of Genesis. It's not a loving dispute, and it's a very difficult story. Cain murders his younger brother Abel out of jealousy and anger, and it's misplaced anger. Almost everyone says, is it Abel's fault that the God character in this story likes his offering better than he likes Cain's offering? It's pretty clear that God is the one causing the strife, which makes it a very challenging story to make sense of. Some scholars interpret it as an allegorical representation of disputes between farmers, Cain, and shepherds, Abel, because farmers and shepherds have or had very different ideas about the use and the ownership of land. It's not clear who wins in this case. The shepherd's offering is preferred, but the shepherd ends up dead. On the human level, you might wonder, was Cain always jealous of Abel? Was Abel his mother's favorite too? There is a very curious phenomenon in the Hebrew Bible. It's almost never the eldest son or daughter who is the favorite. And there are many, many, many stories in the Bible about sibling rivalry and parental favorites. Many, just about every one has some element of parental favorites and sibling rivalry. And Abel and Cain are the first two human offspring, the first brothers, the first mother's first children, according to the story in Genesis. And the younger one is favored, in this case by God, setting the pattern. Jealousy, literally covetousness, wanting something someone else has, is prohibited in the Ten Commandments, along with murder, stealing, adultery, and bearing false witness. You might want to think about how much dissension and disputes are rooted in jealousy and covetousness. Even disputes about land are related to covetousness, disputes about who owns what and why. And how much discord is rooted in a person or a group feeling less than or threatened to become less than, have less than someone else. That to me is at the root of much of the anti-immigrant and racist rhetoric and beliefs that we have, not only in this country, but all around the world. And I've also been thinking about how we handle our own disputes, conflicts, dissension, and disagreements. How did you learn to handle conflict? How did you learn to handle disputes? The first place most of us learn is in our families. And a few weeks ago, my husband Booker and I hosted a family gathering, in part to wish safe travels to our son Elliot, who was about to leave New England for Portland, Oregon, I'm sad to say. I actually asked my family members who were there and received permission to tell the story, or actually it's my version of it. Some of the names and details I changed. So after the meal, I went to the kitchen and I started to wash the dishes. I didn't hear how this discussion or argument started. I later learned that Angela had made a comment about how challenged she felt when hearing they, them, and theirs as singular pronouns. And cousin Fred was on fire immediately. It's nonsense. I know the English language. They, them, and theirs are plural. They always have been, they always will be. Actually, Fred, I piped up from the kitchen, you're wrong. There was an English woman in the 1700s who wrote an influential grammar text in which she was one of the first to insist that they, them be reserved for plural use only. Before that, it was used for both singular and plural. Really? Fred wasn't buying that. He said, what was her name? Well, I didn't remember. Regardless, Fred said. And he was I'm up on his soapbox, continuing his defense of proper English. And Booker started out, if you lived in Northampton, Fred snorted contemptuously, and they were off, and their voices were raised in argument. My sister Betsy joined the fray, and this was not the way my family usually behaves. I focused on the dishes. Others joined in. At one point, I heard Fred, they were in the next room, Fred going, "Let me finish. You've been doing all the talking. You keep interrupting me. You're not listening." And Elliot stood in the middle of all this. Nearly 20 years ago, when he was in middle school, Elliot's the only millennial in the room. Everyone else is over 60. Has matter-of-factly supported his middle school friend Peter, when Peter was the first kid in the 8th grade to come out as gay. And then a few years later, maybe when they were in college, he had equally matter-of-factly accepted Peter's name change to Mason and Mason's choice of they, them pronouns. Someone, it might have been Betsy, asked Elliot what he thought about all the debate. And it happens that he works for a company that conducts employee surveys for large and medium-sized businesses and other organizations, assessing their culture and advising them how to develop policies and practices that will attract and retain productive workers. And I don't remember exactly what Elliot said, only that his tone was even and thoughtful in contrast to all the noise that everyone else was making. Things settled down. It was time to go home. And there didn't seem to be any hard feelings when it was over. But I wondered if anybody learned anything. So I'm not a fan of debating. And I wasn't taught in my family of origin about how to take on conflict effectively. We learn to address conflict by complaining to someone else about the person with whom we are having the problem, or not to say anything at all until something inside breaks. Two parents, two different conflict styles. I have a vivid memory of a phone call with my mother from about 15 or 20 years ago when she was worried and upset about a decision that one of my sisters was making. And she called to ask me to talk to my sister about what she thought my sister should do. And by then I had done enough therapy to be able to say it was time for me to stand my own ground. So I said, "Ma, I don't think it's my job to tell her what you want her to do. I think you need to do that." And she said, "I don't think I can. I'm afraid she'll be angry with me or think that I don't support her." So I said, "Well, maybe you could write her a letter." And I don't remember what happened after that. It doesn't really matter. How do we learn how to engage productively in conflicts with other people? And how not to engage in conflict? How do we learn to reach common ground, live together in peace when we don't agree? And the culture around us is so fractured and so rife with hostile rhetoric, with people who are covetous and worried that someone will get something that rightly belongs to them, people looking over their shoulder at the other, entrenched in positions that are based on fear, people who are jealously guarding whatever they believe to be true, including their understanding of whatever it means to be a true American, or a true French person, or a true English person, or a true German. People who long for a world where it's still clear to everyone who matters that the pecking order has a right, white, cisgender, heterosexual section at the top where they belong. Or people who just long for a world where English grammar doesn't start to play tricks on them. Building bridges between our divisions. Is there anything to be hopeful for or about? Last winter and spring, many of you participated in what we called a Leading in Love Dialogues program, which used a workbook that was developed by David Kampt, who was an anti-racism consultant and educator. And that program allows participants or helps participants develop skills to engage in challenging conversations. In this case, specifically around race, but also applicable to other areas, such as bridging divides across the political landscape. The skills that we practiced included listening, asking questions. One of the techniques was to ask someone questions about experiences that they'd had that led them to hold certain beliefs, and then finding connections in what they say to our own questions and experiences. Staying open, staying curious, paying attention to our own assumptions and biases as we listened and tried to stay connected to the person with whom we differed. And many of you did some or all of that work. I think some of us were changed by it, or felt it was at least a good first step or a good step. But as I look back on that family conversation, dispute that we had, I really don't think Fred would have responded well to being asked about the experience he had had that led him to believe that they, them are exclusively plural. And a large family gathering like that is not probably the best place for a serious conversation about someone's questions and confusion about gender identity and gender fluidity. And sometimes we just need to express our frustration or our anger and get them out first, before we're ready to listen to what other people have to say. Most of us are more likely to listen when we feel that we have been heard. And this is hopeful. Some people actually are persuaded by facts. So that family conversation that started 3 weeks ago continued by email. Betsy happened to go to a work training on gender and diversity, and she forwarded the slides, and she asked Elliot what he thought of it. And she also noted, because she's my older sister, that she had not been able to find any evidence of the existence of an 18th century female English grammarian. Right? She's the one with the PhD. I dug out the sermon and I sent it along. Her name was Ann Fisher. You can look her up. Elliot responded that the slide presentation was consistent with what he knew, and this is what he said. He said, I think the important message is that about learning this stuff is that the most important thing is just be open-minded and patient with ourselves and others. What's happening now is a lot like what happened, parentheses, in most of the country, decades ago with sexuality. We're having to adapt our language and our behaviors and our assumptions about people because we're realizing as a society that there are people who don't fit neatly into the categories and expectations we developed however many years ago. It seems like a lot to take on at first, but it's actually pretty straightforward and easy to adjust to once you get in the habit. Someone's pronouns or gender identity are just another piece of information you pick up as you get to know them. And then he said, I realize that a lot of the discourse around this, especially in media, is highly charged and aggressive, and that makes it seem scarier than it is. What if I use the wrong pronoun? My experience in the real world has been that outside of instances where someone is being willfully obtuse or hurtful, people are generally understanding and patient if you make mistakes, as long as there's a genuine effort to apologize and learn. Well, I read that and I said, I think there's a sermon in this and some hope. When we argue, Zhang-Chu asks, if you get the better of me, are you necessarily right and I'm wrong? If I get the better of you, am I necessarily right and you're wrong? Are we both partly right and partly wrong? We cannot know this, he says, and therefore we live in darkness. Do we have to live in darkness? And is knowing what matters? Why didn't the people at our family gathering go away angry? They were yelling at each other. Maybe, possibly, because families are a covenantal community where we have agreed to be stuck with one another, whether we know it or not, whether we've made it explicit or not. And thinking back on that early myth about Cain and Abel, maybe that tells us something about what happens when we're not in covenant. Whose fault was it that Cain killed Abel? There is no avoiding the answer to that question. The fault lies with the character who decided to favor Abel's offering over Cain's. And to what purpose? It's a reminder, thousands and thousands of years after that story was first told, of what powerful forces, people, institutions in power, what powerful forces continue to do to foment jealousy and discord. And it might hold a little reminder to pay attention to what we do with our own power. I'm glad we're talking here about covenant. And I'm looking forward as we continue to have these conversations within our families, within this faith community, within the larger community, and the interdependent web of all life of which we are a part. I'm grateful that we're doing it together in community and in love. I invite you to stand, sing in your heart, hum in your mask, sing out loud if you're online. Hymn number 323, Break Not the Circle.
Break not the circle of enabling love, where people grow forgiving. Break not that circle, make it wider still, till it includes embraces all the living. Come wonder at this love that comes to life, where words of freedom are with you are spoken, and people keep no score of wrong and guilt, but will that human bonds remain unbroken. Join then the movement of the love that frees, till people of whatever race or nation will truly be themselves, stand on their feet, see eye to eye with laughter and elation.
We end this morning with hopeful words from the Universalist Hosea Ballou. If we agree in love, there is no disagreement that can do us injury. Let us endeavor to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bonds of peace. May it be so.